This story begins in the old neighborhood of the town of Pan, where a little girl with striking pink hair named Gu was walking down the streets. Gu was the biological daughter of the abused protagonist and a genius hacker. A year ago, she entered the world of a tragic novel, becoming the 5-year-old daughter of the main character, Gu Manchi. The plot advances to the moment when the Zhao family arrives with an opportunity to take in a woman, and Gu Manchi returns home. Gu, curious about the situation, went to the open door and started eavesdropping on the conversation. A girl turned to Moni, claiming that she was indeed her biological mother and even produced a paternity test as proof. She explained that it was her mother's fault for not properly looking after her when she was just 5 years old, which led to her being kidnapped. At this point, Gu Manchi, the female lead of the story, was standing in the room. An older woman, Tang Changu, who was the biological mother of the protagonist, looked at the young girl and wondered if she should give her mother another chance. Taking the girl's hand, Tang Changu suggested that the girl return to the Zhao family with her mother and live a better life. She also mentioned that her father, brother, and sister missed her dearly. Hearing this, the girl began to feel conflicted. In the original novel, after the protagonist was kidnapped, she was unintentionally adopted by a poor foster mother who cared for her deeply until she passed away. To cover the medical expenses for her ill foster mother, the protagonist had no choice but to enter the entertainment industry. Suwanan, a powerful figure in the entertainment world and the main male lead, noticed how much Gu Manchi resembled his first love. He offered her a large sum of money in exchange for becoming his contract mistress. With no other option to save her foster mother, the protagonist accepted the offer. In the brief time they spent together, Gu Manchi found herself falling in love with the mysterious and dangerous man. However, with the return of Sun Chen's first love and the death of her gravely ill foster mother, Gu Manchi was devastated by the double blow. Overwhelmed, she decided to leave her boyfriend, go into hiding, and raise her future child on her own. In time, she gave birth to a beautiful little girl named Gu, all by herself. Gu Manchi eventually returned to her foster mother's house. By this time, Gu had already started school. One day, when Gu came home, she went straight to her mother, announcing her return. Smiling, she told her mother that she was very hungry and wanted some milk. Although she appeared to be a little girl, Gu found it deeply uncomfortable that her adult soul was trapped in a child's body, forcing her to act in a way that didn't match her true age. As Gu entered the room, she noticed her mother speaking with an elderly woman. Curious, she immediately asked who the old lady was. Gu Manchi smiled warmly and turned to her daughter, explaining that the woman was her grandmother and suggesting it would be nice if Gu started calling her by that name. Gu smiled politely and greeted the elderly woman, calling her grandmother. The old woman, overcome with emotion, turned to her daughter and asked whose child Gu was. Gu Manchi lovingly patted Gu's head and explained that she was her own daughter and had just turned 5 that year. Tears welled up in the elderly woman's eyes as she placed her hand on her daughter's face, remarking on how much Gu Manchi had suffered over the years. She added that she knew her daughter had endured great hardships. The elderly woman then told Gu Manchi that she would send a car the next day to pick her and Gu up, to bring them to the Zhao family home. She promised that from then on, no one would ever be able to insult or harm them again. Gu Manchi, filled with unexpected joy, couldn't believe her good fortune. She had not anticipated that her mother's arrival would lead to such a drastic change in their circumstances. As the older woman turned to leave, she reassured Gu Manchi that everything would be alright and instructed them to get ready before the evening. She also mentioned she would leave first and wished them a good day. Gu, however, was skeptical of the elderly woman, sensing something off. But as a child, there was little she could do about her suspicions. Later, Gu Manchi and Gu went out into the courtyard to see the woman off. The elderly lady had already climbed into the car, and after saying their goodbyes, Gu Manchi advised her to drive safely. Chuna, the grandmother, smiled at them one last time before turning to her driver and ordering in a cold, commanding voice to go already. As the car drove away, Gu turned to her mother and asked if she really intended to move to their new grandmother's house. She expressed her concern, stating that she found the grandmother to be cruel and very suspicious. Gu Manchi wiped the crumbs from Gu's face and gently explained that the woman was her birth mother and that she wanted to reconnect with her family. Gu, not entirely convinced, then asked if it was true that the grandmother's family was very wealthy. Gumanchi confirmed that they were indeed rich and quite well known in the capital. Upon hearing this, Gu smiled and remarked that if her grandmother's family was so rich, she didn't understand why they hadn't found them sooner. After all, she was already 5 years old, and her grandmother had just now decided to search for them. What Gu was really thinking was that if her grandmother had truly wanted to find them, she would have done so a long time ago. She advised her mother to think carefully about her words. Gumanchi, however, just smiled, gently stroked her daughter's head, and reassured her that as her grandmother's biological daughter, there was no way her mother would ever harm her. She told Gu not to worry so much. Gu didn't argue with her mother any further, but deep down, she realized that her mother's compassionate nature made her an easy target for others, which explained why she had suffered so much in the original story. In fact, in the original novel, Tang Chungu had claimed she wanted Gumanchi to embrace her true heritage. But in reality, her goal was to marry Gumanchi off to an old, wealthy man. The naive Gumanchi had been deceived and forced to marry a fat, aging man in his 40s. She died soon after, and her poor daughter Gu was left all alone, eventually starving to death on the streets. This time, however, with another soul inhabiting the body, Gu was determined not to let history repeat itself. She looked at her mother and realized she wasn't strong enough to face this alone, so Gu decided she would help her mother through it. The next day arrived, and Gumanchi and Gu packed their belongings to head to Gumanchi's biological mother's house. They were driven by a man sent specifically by Chungu to pick them up. During the ride, the driver turned to Gumanchi and suggested that she could take a nap since they still had a few hours before reaching the capital. At that moment, Gu was eating a cake, and she turned to the driver, asking whether her grandmother and other relatives would truly love her and her mother. The driver laughed and assured her that of course they would, because Madame was Gumanchi's biological mother, and she couldn't help but love her daughter. He added that Madame had been overjoyed to find her long-lost child and that the entire Zhao family was thrilled about Gumanchi's return. Gu listened carefully, then asked why, if her grandmother loved them so much, she hadn't sent a plane for them, making them endure such a long car ride. She added that she could have been watching TV in just 2 hours if they had flown, and she wouldn't even need to sleep. The driver was caught off guard by the question and, flustered, replied that perhaps all the plane tickets were sold out since tickets to the capital are in high demand. At that moment, Gumanchi approached her daughter, smiling, and said that Granny probably wanted to bring them to the capital quietly, without drawing too much attention. Gu, of course, didn't believe that for a second. She thought to herself that the woman's actions hinted at a lack of genuine affection, but she knew her mother didn't see things the way she did. Several hours passed, and by then, the day was well underway. Finally, the car pulled up to the Zhao residence. Upon their arrival, a young girl greeted them and instructed them to follow her, as the master and madam were waiting. When they entered the dining hall, Tang Chungu's face lit up with excitement. She greeted them warmly, saying how happy she was that they had finally arrived. Chungu took Gumanchi's hand and urged them to sit down, mentioning that lunch had just been prepared. Gu stayed back, observing the scene. In her mind, if this woman truly cared for them, she would have shown more restraint and given them some space to feel comfortable. She wanted time to assess who she could trust. Gu's eyes wandered around the dining hall. At the far end of the table, she noticed a serious-looking man, Chao Qing, the father of the main character. His stern demeanor didn't intimidate Gu, as she wondered who exactly he thought he was going to scare with that expression. Seated next to him was Chia Yang, the protagonist's brother. Gu remembered from the original novel that he was the only genuinely good person in the family. He would eventually become a billionaire, a successful and powerful figure. Gu knew she needed to build a connection with him. Without hesitation, she walked up to Chia Yang and gently tapped him on the arm. As soon as he turned his head toward her, he was met with the sight of his niece's sweet face. Gu smiled sweetly at her uncle and asked him for a hug. As Chia Yan lifted her into his arms, she noticed his large, watery eyes, which seemed familiar to her, though she couldn't immediately recall who they reminded her of. Before she could think any further, he asked for her name. Gu quickly introduced herself, saying he could call her Gu. She added, with a playful smile, that her name was just like a story about first love. Xia Yan was surprised by this and asked her how old she was and what she knew about such things. Gu confidently replied that she learned about it from watching TV and, of course, she knew what first love was. Looking him straight in the eye, she explained that first love is when the first person you like feels the same, and you begin a relationship. Then, she cheekily asked her uncle if he had ever experienced a first love. Laughing, Xie Yin admitted that he might have. But Gu wasn't fooled. She already knew about his first love, a famous streamer named Kit. She also knew that his parents were against his relationship with Kit, even though he still had feelings for her. Just as this conversation was unfolding, another person entered the room. A young woman with pink hair turned to her parents and asked if her sister, Myy, had returned. This was Chao Meni, the youngest sister of the novel's protagonist. Meni walked over to Gu Manqi and, addressing her mother, asked if she could introduce her biological sister. Fixing her appearance as she leaned over to inspect Gu Manqi, Meni remarked, almost sarcastically, that Gu Manqi still looked beautiful. She added that she had thought the hardships of village life would have ruined her looks. Meni then asked why Gu Manqi's father, Gu's father, wasn't present at the meeting, since all she could see was her little niece. Gu Manqi, smiling but with a hint of sadness, explained that Gu's father had passed away early on, which was why he couldn't be there. Hearing this, Meni commented that her sister must have had a pretty rough life before reuniting with the family. Gu Manqi immediately sensed something was off. Meni's words carried a subtle hostility that Gu Manqi couldn't ignore. Undeterred, Meni continued, saying that since Gu was already 5 years old, she should start her education in the capital. Turning to her mother, Meni asked if she had already helped Gu Manqi pick out a kindergarten for her niece. Smiling, Chenggu replied that she had indeed selected a kindergarten, located in the eastern suburbs of the capital, called Royal. Chenggu then turned to Gu Manqi and reiterated that Gu was 5 now, meaning her education needed to progress properly. She assured Gu Manqi that this kindergarten had been carefully chosen, with responsible teachers, so she could trust the decision completely. Gu Manqi was about to object, but before she could, Meni put a hand on her shoulder, telling her not to worry so much. She explained that Gu was still young and it was important for her to make as many friends as possible, especially since other kids her age were already learning English. Gu shouldn't fall behind. Chenggu, noticing Gu Manqi's hesitation, placed a hand on her daughter's arm and urged her to listen, reminding her that she was still young and needed to take care of herself, in addition to raising Gu. She told Gu Manqi to take a good look at herself in the mirror, pointing out how thin she looked and how that broke her mother's heart. After hearing all of this, Gu Manqi realized they had a point. Gu was an incredibly smart child, and she needed to interact more with children her age to develop socially. Gu Manqi understood that her daughter couldn't always stay cooped up in her room playing computer games. Gu, overhearing this, was overjoyed. She was thrilled that she would finally get the chance to go to kindergarten and make friends. In the original novel, the Zhao family only pretended to find a prestigious kindergarten for Gu. In reality, their true aim was to separate her from her mother, Gu Manqi, so that they could no longer communicate. With Gu out of the way, her biological mother, Tang Chenggu, could then arrange for her daughter to meet the horrible, old, and corrupt man, Mr. Li. Moreover, the kindergarten they chose wasn't prestigious at all. In fact, it was more like a torture chamber. Gu spent several days there, starved and neglected, which left her pale and dangerously thin. Tang Chenggu had deliberately bribed and coerced everyone at the school, falsely claiming that Gu Manqi was Mr. Li's wife. As a result, Gu Manqi was not allowed to pick up her daughter because Gu had supposedly taken on a different surname. This horrible place was the beginning of the tragic events in the novel, and Gu knew she had to stop it from happening this time. A while later, Gu turned to her uncle, Xie Yin, and told him she didn't want to go to that daycare center at all. Hugging him tightly, she said she would much rather stay and play with her dear uncle. In truth, she hoped that this kind uncle could somehow save her from the terrible fate that awaited her at that school. Xie Yin, who usually stayed out of family affairs, found his mother's sudden gentleness and interest in Gu Manqi's return to be highly suspicious. He knew his parents were profit-driven merchants who valued everything based on its benefit. His mother had always despised women who lost their virtue, and for the 18 years that Gu Manqi had been missing, she had never once mentioned wanting to find her. Now, suddenly, she was acting kind and welcoming. This strange behavior made Xie Yin think he needed to investigate further. After lunch, Meni turned to her sister Gu Manqi and offered to take Gu to her new room so the two sisters could talk. Gu followed her aunt to the room, and when she arrived, she couldn't believe her eyes. The entire room was just for her, filled with beautiful things, dolls, and toys. She ran excitedly from one side of the room to the other, taking in everything. She exclaimed that it was all so beautiful and that there were so many different dolls to play with. Watching her, many couldn't help but think that village children were so easily deceived, a few dolls could make them forget everything. But Gu noticed the smug expression on her aunt's face and inwardly scoffed at the idea that these dolls would impress her. What she truly valued were a computer, a black unlimited credit card, and a fast car to race around town. After a while, Minnie approached Gu with a smile and gently asked if she knew who her father was. Gu was caught off guard by the question and, after a brief silence, told her aunt that she wanted to share a secret but only if she promised not to tell anyone. Curious, Minnie sat beside her and assured her that she could keep a secret. Gu moved closer and whispered that her mother had told her that her dad was a diver. Minnie was shocked and surprised, unable to believe that the child's father actually had a legitimate job. She had assumed he was some kind of gangster or a shady character who spent his time hanging out in bars. Keeping her cool, Minnie smiled and asked where Gu's father was now. Still clutching her toy, Gu responded that her father lived in the sea. She explained that her mom had told her he was the best diver in the world, and while most divers come back after a short dive, her dad wasn't like them at all. In fact, Gu said with a smile, he had been underwater for 5 years and still hadn't returned yet. Many couldn't believe the ridiculousness of the story. It was clear that Gu Manchi had fabricated this lie to shield her daughter from the truth about her father. Furious on the inside, Minnie didn't let her emotions show in front of Gu. Instead, she calmly stood up, telling her niece that she had some things to attend to and that Gu could play on her own for a while. Gu smiled brightly, assuring her aunt that it was no problem and that she could handle everything. But as soon as Minnie left the room, Gu thought to herself that it was time to remind her mother that the royal kindergarten was absolutely not a good place for her. Without wasting any time, Gu went straight to her computer. She began searching for information, determined to gather details that would help her avoid the cruel fate that had befallen her in the original novel. After several hours of searching on her computer, Gu finally found what she needed: shocking news with various headlines about the royal kindergarten, revealing it to be an absolutely horrible place. Armed with this information, she ran to her bed, thinking about her next move. She decided to check with her little brother to see if he had found the confidential information about Song Chen, a powerful figure in the entertainment industry. She pulled a small, hidden computer from under the bed and hoped that this information could provide some security for her and her mother. Soon, the special contact she relied on found exactly what she was looking for: detailed, confidential information about Song Chen. As expected, it contained important secrets about the entertainment tycoon, all gathered neatly in an email. Gu praised her contact for doing a great job. The contact, curious, asked where she had been recently. When she casually replied that she was getting ready for kindergarten, of course, they didn't believe her. Her employees were incredibly intelligent, and even she realized how absurd it sounded. She would hardly believe it herself if she were in their shoes. As the hours passed, darkness fell outside. Gu Manchi came into the room and gently told Gu it was time to put away her gadgets and go to bed. Gu looked at her mother and said that the computer was incredibly fun, and she wanted to play with it some more tomorrow. Gu Manchi smiled, picked her daughter up, and reassured her that she could play whatever she wanted the next day. Before Gu Manchi could turn off the laptop, Gu discreetly pressed a button, minimizing all the open tabs. She was careful not to expose her secret activities. Gu Manchi tucked her in, told her to go to sleep, and turned to the computer to shut it down. As she did, an article popped up on the screen, the very same news about the royal kindergarten that Gu had been researching earlier. Curious, Gu Manchi began reading the article and was stunned by what it said. The kindergarten was described as having disgusting conditions, a far cry from the prestigious reputation it supposedly had. She immediately recalled her mother's praise for the school and couldn't believe she had been so eager to send her granddaughter there. The realization left her deeply troubled. Just then, Gu, still holding her mouse, turned to her mother and commented how much adults seemed to enjoy playing on the computer. She added that Auntie Minnie had been playing on the computer earlier that evening and had asked her who her father was. Gu Manchi was taken aback, not expecting this, and couldn't believe that Minnie had been using their computer. but at least now she understood where the kindergarten records had come from. However, she was still puzzled about why many had asked about Gu's father. Walking over to her daughter, Gumanshi asked what exactly Auntie Minnie had said. Gu, grinning, was happy that her mother was finally showing some sharpness, something she hadn't done much before. She told her mother that Auntie Minnie had also called Gu little idiot and claimed that her existence would ruin the Chow family's plans. Gu, still smiling innocently, asked her mother what being a little idiot meant and joked if it was something you could eat. Gumanshi, hearing this, was deeply shocked. She couldn't believe that her sister had referred to her child that way. Gu, meanwhile, was quite pleased with herself, knowing that stirring up trouble was one of her strengths. It was one of the perks of being in a child's body, no one would ever suspect a 5-year-old of anything. As Gumanshi tucked her daughter into bed, still processing what she had learned, her birth mother, Tang Chungu, was sitting quietly on the balcony, contemplating her own plans. On a video call with Mr. Lee, Tang Chungu proudly mentioned that her eldest daughter, Minnie, had just returned to the country and sent him a picture of her. She asked for his opinion on her appearance. On the other side of the call, Mr. Lee, smoking a cigar, chuckled and expressed how much he liked her, saying he was very interested in marrying her eldest daughter. He assured Tang Chungu not to worry about anything, as they would soon be family, and he promised to take care of her in both personal and business matters. Tang Chungu was thrilled. The Lee family was very influential in the capital, and forming a connection with them would surely boost her family's business beyond her wildest dreams. As their conversation ended, Tang Chungu told Mr. Lee she would arrange a meeting with Minnie the next day, and with a smile, she added that they were now family. After bidding farewell, she sat back, satisfied, just as Minnie came in and sat across from her. Turning to her youngest daughter, Tang Chungu, still beaming, informed her that everything had been settled. Smiling, she commented that while Mr. Lee was an old, fat, and rather unpleasant man, he was a perfect match for Gumanshi, who was now a widow. It was, after all, a practical arrangement. Then, her mother shifted the conversation toward Minnie, mentioning that she, too, was at the perfect age to start considering marriage options. She casually suggested that the Chen family, also quite influential in the capital, might be a good match for her. Minnie sighed heavily, clearly uninterested, and replied that she had no desire to marry into the Chen family. With a playful wink, she hinted that if she had to choose, it would probably be Song Chen, the entertainment tycoon with billions in assets. She couldn't help but glow with excitement as she talked about him. He was single, handsome, and one of the most powerful men in the industry. Her mother laughed and agreed that Song Chen did seem like an excellent candidate. She promised to find a way to introduce Minnie to him. Grateful, Minnie thanked her mother, and that was how their evening ended. The next morning, Tang Chungu and Gumanshi gathered in the dining room for breakfast. Chungu mentioned that she planned to visit the royal kindergarten later that day and would also accompany her husband to the company to familiarize herself with the family business. Minnie, however, expressed that she wanted to personally accompany Gu to the kindergarten, given the significance of the day. She felt it was important to be by her daughter's side. Tang Chungu, laughing lightly, waved off the suggestion. She told Minnie that sending Gu to kindergarten was a small, simple task compared to the big responsibility of getting to know the company. She encouraged Minnie to focus on learning the business, promising that after some time, she might even offer her some shares in the family company. At that moment, Xie Yan entered the room. With a smile, he offered to accompany Gu to the kindergarten instead. He explained that he had a free day and would like to go, as he had been feeling uneasy since the previous night. Something about the situation seemed off, and he wanted to see things for himself. Chungu immediately stood up, insisting that he didn't need to make such a big sacrifice. She reminded him that he had work to do and that this was hardly an event worth his time. Xie Yan was about to argue when, suddenly, all three of them heard a loud, strange noise coming from the upper floor. Gumanshi's heart sank. She immediately realized that the noise must have come from Gu's room. Without a second thought, she rushed upstairs. Bursting into the room, she was horrified to find Gu lying on the floor with her knee injured, blood seeping from a torn-up wound. Shards of broken objects lay scattered around her, adding to the chaos of the scene. The girl was crying loudly, clutching her hurt knee, while her aunt, Minnie, stood nearby. As soon as Gumanshi saw the situation, her instincts kicked in, and she became immediately suspicious. Minnie, sensing how bad the situation might look, quickly started explaining, turning her head nervously and insisting that it wasn't what they might think. Meanwhile, Gu continued to cry, her face streaked with tears. Gumanchi rushed to her daughter's side, gently pulling her away from the scene. She reassured Gu, telling her not to be scared, that everything would be fine. "I'll call a doctor, sweetheart, don't worry," she promised, trying to calm her down. Their brother, Xia Yan, turned toward Minnie with anger in his voice, demanding, "What happened here?" Minnie, visibly shaken, realized how suspicious the situation seemed. Frightened, she stammered, claiming she didn't really know what had happened. She explained that she had simply called out to Gu, and the little girl had wanted to be carried in her arms. Then, suddenly, her arm ached, and she accidentally let her fall to the ground. Minnie added that the vase by the bed had fallen to the floor at the same time, smashing on impact. Gu, still crying but with her clever mind always working, looked up at her uncle and said through her tears, "Uncle, don't blame Auntie. I'm just very clumsy. That's why this happened." Gumanchi sighed heavily, visibly upset but trying to maintain her composure. She added, "Perhaps it's just a bit of clumsiness on her part. I should have been watching her more closely. This is my fault." Her words surprised many, who hadn't expected Gumanchi to take partial responsibility. Just then, Xia Yan approached and gently took Gu by the shoulders, carefully leading her out of the room. "There might be glass in her leg," he said. "We need to take her to the hospital immediately to check if everything's okay." Gumanchi, embarrassed by the chaos, apologized to her brother, saying, "I'm sorry for disturbing you. I didn't mean for this to cause so much trouble." After they left, Tang Chungu turned to Minnie, her face stern. She spoke in a hushed, almost conspiratorial tone, "Even if you don't like this little girl, you'll have plenty of chances to make her life difficult later. But right now, Gumanchi doesn't fully trust us. If you act too rashly, it'll only make her more suspicious and cautious. Worse, it'll anger your brother and father." Minnie, defensive, immediately replied, "But I didn't do it on purpose. It was a real accident. I would never intentionally harm a small child." Her mother sighed heavily. "Regardless of what happened, you'll need to apologize sincerely when they return. I'll have someone clean up the room in the meantime. Apologize and don't cause further suspicion." Minnie was fuming inside, but she knew better than to argue any further. There was no way to prove her innocence, so she held her tongue for now. At this point, they were already sitting in Grandpa Chucho's car, and Gu turned to her mother, saying that her leg hurt terribly. Gumanchi reassured her, saying they were almost at the hospital, and it wouldn't be long before she felt better. Then, Xia Yan, her uncle, turned to her and asked her gently whether she had really hurt herself by accident or if there was something else she wasn't telling them. Gu, her voice trembling, insisted that she had indeed hurt herself accidentally and that it had nothing to do with anyone else. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked down at her leg, where the wound was deep. Inside, she hoped that her grandfather would keep questioning her, giving her the chance to keep playing her part. The man, sensing something was off, asked her to tell him the truth without fear of repercussions, assuring her that he would be on her side no matter what. Her mother, concerned, hugged her tightly and softly asked if it had really been an accident or if she was just too afraid to tell the truth. In the original story, the sweet and naive Gumanchi had been framed by her cunning sister, Yamani, on multiple occasions. Yamani was better at playing the weak, pitiful victim, and every time, she kept Gumanchi in the dark, even betraying her while pretending to be on her side. However, this time things were different. Gu was here, and she was determined not to let her aunt get away with it. Gu clung to her mother and said that it wasn't something she could share with them. She added, with tears in her eyes, that if she told the truth, her mother might never love her again. Crying softly, she said that she didn't want a new father or to be separated from her mother. Then, Gu revealed something shocking. Aunt Yamani had told her she was dirty and had thrown her to the ground. When Gumanchi heard this, she was stunned. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Could it really be true? In her previous life, Gu had never cried, but on this day, she was determined to shed all the tears she hadn't allowed herself before. She wasn't used to showing this much emotion, but if this didn't wake her mother up and help her realize what was happening, she didn't know what else would. Gumanchi, still processing what Gu had said, began to think about the implications of her daughter's words, especially the mention of a new father and the way her family had been treating them. It was clear to Gumanchi that the family wasn't as kind to her as they appeared. Their kindness seemed more like a show for their own motives. Turning to her older brother, Gumanchi asked bluntly if he and Tang Chungu, their mother, were on the same side, pushing the same agenda. Xia Yan was taken aback by the question but continued driving, assuring her that he had no intention of hurting her and didn't want to cause any harm now. After some time, they finally arrived at the hospital, where the doctors examined Gu's leg and bandaged the wound. The doctor cautioned the parents, explaining that Gu had been very lucky. If the glass had cut her eye or scratched her face, her life could have been ruined. He urged them to be more careful, reminding them that such a beautiful child needed to be protected. Gumanchi, still shaken, promised the doctor she would be more careful in the future and that nothing like this would happen again. The doctor finished the examination and advised them to let the child rest, reminding them to call him if any further problems arose. As they were leaving the hospital, Gumanchi turned to her older brother, Xia Yan, and brought up something that had been troubling her. She told him that Tang Chungu had spoken highly of the royal kindergarten, calling it the best in the capital. But Gumanchi had recently seen disturbing information online about the school. She said with tears in her eyes that if Gu does not hurt herself on that day, she cannot prevent her from being taken to that dangerous place. She also pointed out that the entire Chao family had always looked down on her, so she couldn't understand why Xia Yan was suddenly being so generous, taking her and her daughter to the hospital. Gumanchi had once believed her family would be people she could trust and rely on, but reality turned out to be quite the opposite. As they drove in the car, Xia Yan turned to Gumanchi and suggested that it might be better if she and Gu didn't return to the Chu family right away. He offered for them to stay in his apartment, mentioning that he had plenty of empty rooms where they could stay as long as they needed. Gumanchi, surprised by her brother's kindness, hesitated for a moment, but agreed. She thought it might be a good idea to stay somewhere peaceful, away from the noise of the capital, especially while Gu's leg was healing. Just then, Gumanchi's phone rang. It was Tang Chungu, her mother. Xia Yan immediately cautioned her not to contradict their mother, reminding her that the Jiao family held significant influence in the capital, and if Gumanchi were to oppose them, it would be difficult for her and Gu to escape unnoticed. Gumanchi reluctantly agreed and answered the call. On the other end, Tang Chungu's voice was calm and caring, immediately asking how Gu was doing. She apologized, saying that the injury was due to their carelessness. She added that she had already instructed the servants to clean and hang carpets everywhere so that Gu wouldn't get hurt again. Hearing this, Gumanchi momentarily thought her mother sounded quite gentle and considerate, but she wasn't as easily fooled as she had been before. Gumanchi replied that Gu had several glass shards embedded in her leg and that the doctor advised she shouldn't walk for a while. Because of that, she decided to stay with Gu at the hospital. Tang Chungu was a bit taken aback by this news, but she recovered quickly and assured Gumanchi that taking care of the child was indeed important. She added that their relatives were thrilled to hear about Gumanchi's return and wanted to meet with her soon, perhaps as early as tomorrow. Gumanchi, however, suggested they discuss it the next day, emphasizing that her priority was taking care of Gu. After that, she abruptly hung up the phone, without giving Tang Chungu a chance to respond further. As soon as the call ended, Tang Chungu, now suspicious, realized she needed to arrange a meeting between Gumanchi and Mr. Li quickly. She feared that Gumanchi was beginning to suspect something. The next day, Gumanchi and Gu arrived at Xia Yan's apartment. Gu, marveling at the place, exclaimed how beautiful her uncle's home was. Xia Yan smiled and thanked her for the compliment. Turning to his sister, he told her that she and Gu would stay on the second floor, which would be entirely at their disposal. He had already prepared a room for them, and they could stay as long as needed. As they passed one of the rooms, Gu peeked inside and, with excitement, asked if there really was an Ultraman in the room. She also inquired if her uncle liked the character. Xia Yan, closing the door with a chuckle, explained that the room belonged to a friend of his who stayed over sometimes, so the things in there were his. Gu, however, wasn't so easily fooled and immediately began to guess. She playfully said that she understood it must be her aunt's room. But inwardly, Gu sighed heavily. In the original novel, this room had been prepared for the child, but when the Chao family discovered the secret relationship, they sabotaged and killed the child. Gumanchi, sensing her daughter's overactive imagination, became worried about her behavior and gently asked her not to make such remarks. Before long, Xiaoyan said he had to leave for work and wished the two of them a restful stay. Gu Manqi thanked him for the hospitality, and Gu, with a bright smile, said goodbye to her uncle. Xiaoyan, who had grown fond of the little girl, waved back and headed off to work. Back in the room, Gu spent hours playing on the computer. She proudly announced to her mother that she had won yet another game. Gu Manqi stroked her daughter's head lovingly and praised her, telling her she was doing well. Then, with a more serious tone, she added that she would be heading to the royal kindergarten soon to see it for herself. Gu, knowing the dangers of the place, casually told her mother to be careful and wished her a safe trip. Gu Manqi, filled with determination, thought to herself that if the information she found about the kindergarten was true, she needed to witness it with her own eyes so she could confront Tang Chenggu later. As Gu Manqi stepped outside and prepared to leave, a car suddenly pulled up beside her. She stopped in her tracks, turning to see who it was. Tang Chenggu leaned out of the window. It was her mother, Tang Chenggu. She smiled, her voice dripping with feigned warmth, and said she had been looking for Gu Manqi. Surprised, Gu Manqi hesitated, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. Why was her mother suddenly so concerned? Gu's mother, Tang Chenggu, continued speaking softly, her voice filled with emotion. She mentioned that Gu's second uncle had cried tears of joy when he heard Gu Manqi had returned, and he, along with other relatives, had come to meet her that day. Tang Chenggu urged Gu Manqi to come with her to greet them, saying it wouldn't take long. However, Gu Manqi hesitated, explaining that she needed to go back to the hospital to get medicine for Gu, as her leg still hadn't healed. Immediately, Tang Chenggu began crying, blaming herself and the family for being careless and accidentally causing Gu's injury. She took Gu Manqi's hand and, with a sorrowful expression, said she just wanted to do everything she could to make her daughter happy. She pleaded with Gu Manqi, asking how she could doubt her when they shared the same blood and flesh. Gu Manqi stood there for a moment, conflicted, staring at her mother. But before she could respond, Tang Chenggu began gently pushing her into the car, insisting that it would only take a moment to greet the relatives. Gu Manqi, tired and unable to resist any longer, reluctantly got into the car. They drove off quickly, heading to the meeting with the family. Meanwhile, hours passed, and the sun was beginning to set. Back at her uncle's apartment, Gu had been sitting at the computer, finishing her work. She stretched and glanced at the clock, realizing it was already quite late. She remembered that her mother had gone to the suburbs to visit the royal kindergarten, but she should have been back by now. A sudden sense of dread filled her, and she immediately grabbed her phone to call Gu Manqi. However, when she dialed her mother's number, it was unavailable. Panic set in. According to the original plot of the story, this was around the time when the Zhao family would kidnap Gu Manqi to force her into meeting the awful, dirty, and fat Mr. Li. Gu's heart raced as she realized the danger her mother could be in. Without wasting another moment, Gu quickly dialed her uncle, Xiaoyan. The moment he picked up, she screamed into the phone, "Uncle! Mom is missing. She said she was going to check the kindergarten, but she still hasn't returned, and now her phone isn't working. I'm really worried." Xiaoyan, immediately understanding the gravity of the situation, told her to stay calm and reassured her that he would come over and figure things out. After the call ended, Gu felt utterly helpless. She was trapped in a 5-year-old's body, unable to do anything but cry and look cute. She had never felt so powerless. According to the original plot, Tang Chenggu was supposed to orchestrate a trap, where she would storm into a hotel room with a group of people and pretend to catch Gu Manqi and Mr. Li in a compromising position. This would completely ruin Gu Manqi's reputation, forcing her to marry Mr. Li under societal pressure. Gu desperately hoped they could find her mother in time to stop this from happening. Soon, her uncle finally arrived. His driver mentioned that they had tracked down Tang Chenggu's location to the Empire Hotel. Upon hearing this, Xiaoyan turned to Gu and told her they were going to the hotel to find her mother. He instructed her to stay in the car and not leave under any circumstances. Gu, worried but obedient, agreed. However, as soon as her uncle and his assistant disappeared into the hotel, Gu unlocked the car and stepped out. She thought to herself that it was completely unsafe for a child to be left alone in a car. Determined, she decided to follow them inside the hotel. As she stepped through the hotel doors, she remembered from the original story that Tang Chungu was planning to catch Gu Manchi and Mr. Li in a room as high up as the 30th floor. Gu knew she had to find her mother before this happened. When she reached the elevator, however, she realized she was too small to reach the button for the 30th floor. Panic began to set in again. She glanced around, trying to figure out what to do. Just then, a very handsome man entered the elevator. As she took a closer look, Gu's heart skipped a beat. It was Song Chen, her biological father and the main male lead of the story. At this point, Song Chen's assistant leaned down toward Gu, wondering aloud what a little girl like her was doing alone in the elevator. Gu felt her heart race, unsure of what to do next. She quickly realized that she needed her father's help to get to the 30th floor, so she decided to take the initiative. With a pitiful look in her eyes, she looked up at the tall man and said sweetly that she needed to go to the 30th floor to find her mom. She explained that she couldn't reach the button on her own and asked if the tall guy had seen her mom by any chance. As she spoke, she lightly touched his very expensive jacket, as if to emphasize her helplessness. Seeing this, Song Chen's assistant immediately rushed over, worried about his master. He quickly removed Gu's hands from Song Chen's jacket and apologized on her behalf. The assistant then calmly told her that the man she was speaking to was President Song, and that she shouldn't touch his clothes. Still polite, the assistant pressed the button for the 30th floor and reassured Gu that they would help her get there. Gu smiled brightly and thanked them, calling them very kind. But inwardly, she cursed her father, frustrated that even though she was his own daughter, he wasn't paying any attention to her. Mentally, she reminded herself of the backstory. Song Chen had been saved from drowning as a child, and all his life he had believed his savior was the opposite of the villain in the novel. That belief led him to mistreat and harm his real savior, Gu Manchi. The dramatic twist of the story was that Gu Manchi had actually been the one to save him, but he didn't discover this until much later. As the elevator arrived at the 20th floor, Song Chen and his assistant stepped off. The assistant suggested Song Chen get a new suit, clearly annoyed that Gu had touched it. Watching them leave, Gu thought to herself that her horrible father would regret ignoring her today. She vowed to herself that in the future, she would show him what it was like to deal with her. Soon after, the elevator finally reached the 30th floor, and Gu cautiously stepped out. She looked around the hallway, wondering where her uncle was and if he had managed to save her mother yet. As she wandered farther down the hallway, she heard footsteps behind her and assumed it was her uncle. Turning around quickly, she was surprised to see a blonde-haired boy standing in front of her. The boy, addressing her kindly, called her child and asked where her mother was and why she was alone. Gu felt a surge of worry but quickly composed herself. She told him, with a slight quiver in her voice, that she was looking for her mom but couldn't find her. She began to cry loudly, her tears flowing down her cheeks. Seeing her distress, the boy immediately grew concerned and suggested that she might be lost. Just then, another man approached the boy from behind, addressing him as young master. He informed him that everything had been arranged. Mrs. Zhao had booked a room, and there was a meeting scheduled with Mr. Li to discuss some business matters. When Gu heard this, she was startled, realizing that the boy in front of her must be Chen Kuei, the legitimate young master of the Chen family. Gu's eyes widened in surprise. There wasn't much written about Chen Kuei in the original story. All she remembered was that he had been involved in a fierce power struggle within the Chen family and that he eventually died young, at the hands of his father's illegitimate son. Without much explanation, Chen Kuei suddenly ran forward, instructing his assistant to watch over Gu and make sure she didn't wander off. The assistant, though a bit surprised, assured Chen Kuei that everything would be under control. Gu watched Chen Kuei rush away and couldn't help but think that this whole situation felt like he was trying to save Gu Manchi. But what connection could there possibly be between Chen Kuei and her mother? Gu racked her brain, trying to recall if this was mentioned in the original story, but nothing came to mind. Could this be some hidden, additional subplot she hadn't been aware of? Meanwhile, Chen Kuei was sprinting through the hallways, frustrated and confused. He couldn't believe how someone like Gu Manchi, his supposed ally, could be so utterly fooled by Tang Chungu. Finally, he reached Gu Manchi's room, throwing open the doors in desperation. Inside, he couldn't understand how she had been so easily tricked into meeting with the loathsome Mr. Li, and possibly falling into a trap that could ruin her life forever. Chen Kuwei had speculated earlier that perhaps Gu Manqi's intelligence had dropped after becoming a mother, given how easily she had been tricked. But now, seeing the horrific scene before him, he realized it wasn't her intelligence, it was the ruthless manipulation of the Jiao family that had led her here. Bursting into the room, Chen Kuei's eyes widened with rage as he saw Mr. Li brazenly molesting Gu Manqi on the bed. Gu Manqi, struggling and crying, tried desperately to push the much larger man off, but he was overpowering her. Mr. Li smirked and ignored her protests, declaring that he wasn't going anywhere when he had such a beauty in his arms. Furious, Chen Kuei rushed forward and, with all his strength, struck Mr. Li so hard that the man flew a few meters away, crashing into the nearby furniture. Mr. Li, now furious and disoriented, snarled, wondering who dared to interfere with his fun. Chen Kuei stood protectively in front of Gu Manqi, calming her by saying it was okay now, he had arrived just in time to save her. Turning his icy gaze to Mr. Li, Chen Kuei coldly said that a man like him deserved to die for treating innocent women like this. Mr. Li, recognizing the young master of the Chen family, was shocked. He had not expected to see Chen Kuei in this situation and was instantly nervous. However, he tried to recover, putting on a fake smile and explaining that this was all a misunderstanding, that Chen Kuei had gotten it all wrong. Just then, Gu arrived, sprinting into the room. She spotted her mother and, filled with relief, ran to her, exclaiming happily, "Mom! I finally found you!" Gu Manqi, still shaken from the attack, immediately dropped to her knees and hugged her daughter tightly, as if grounding herself in the safety of her child's presence. Tears welled in her eyes, and she repeatedly told Gu that she had missed her so much. Gu, inspecting her mother's face and realizing she hadn't been harmed further, felt relieved. Thankfully, they had arrived just in time before Mr. Li could do anything irreversible. Gu Manqi continued to hug Gu, tears falling as she whispered, "You're such a good girl. I missed you so much." As she began piecing together what had happened, Gu Manqi realized the horrifying truth: her own mother, Tang Chenggu, had tricked her into getting into the family car, drugged her, and led her into this trap. Gu Manqi could hardly believe her mother would go this far, but the evidence was undeniable. The betrayal stung deeply, cutting through her shock. Gu, seeing her mother's tears, tried to lighten the moment. Smiling sweetly, she asked, "Mom, why are you crying? Are you hungry? I have a milk cake for you, so stop crying, okay?" The innocence of her words softened Gu Manqi's heart even more. In her previous life, Gu Manqi had been a loving mother, but now, the girl who inhabited Gu's body, an orphan from another life, finally understood what it felt like to be loved by a mother. She was grateful for this bond. Mr. Li, upon seeing the child, was taken aback. He began to wonder about the woman. Did she really have a child? He couldn't understand it, as Tang Chengshui had told him that her eldest daughter was pure, innocent, and had spent her entire childhood abroad. She supposedly knew nothing about the real world and hadn't been touched by anyone. At that moment, Chen Kuei, the man who had saved Gu Manqi, turned to Mr. Li and asked if he had any problems. Terrified, Mr. Li stammered that everything was fine. Gu Manqi, still shaken, turned to Chen Kuei and expressed her deep gratitude, saying she would find a way to thank him properly later. Chen Kuei, however, seemed uninterested in her thanks and instead asked her if she didn't recognize him. Just then, they heard the voice of Gu Manqi's mother from behind. She began berating Gu Manqi, accusing her of being greedy and scheming to get close to Mr. Li. Chang Shui went on, saying that Gu Manqi came from a poor village, saw a rich man, and immediately wanted to latch onto him. She added that she had no idea how to stop her daughter's ambitions. Turning to her son, she remarked that Mr. Li and Nancy were still together and didn't even have the decency to be ashamed of themselves. However, the woman had avoided looking at the bed for a while. When she finally did, she was shocked to see Gu Manqi standing there, holding her child in her arms. Her surprise left her speechless. Xia Yan was trying to figure out how the troublesome Gu had ended up there, as well as why the young master of the Chen family was also in the room. At this moment, Xia Yan approached Gu and expressed relief that she was unharmed, confessing that she had scared him terribly. Gu then turned to her uncle, questioning how she had found her mother before he did and why he had arrived so late. Ignoring her admiration, her uncle reminded her that he had instructed her to wait for him in the car. The girl just laughed and remained silent, realizing that she had indeed broken her promise. Meanwhile, Chen Kuei asked his assistant to contact the police, explaining that there had been an attempted assault on a woman and that there were both evidence and witnesses. The assistant promptly assured the young master that he would handle it immediately. Mr. Li, however, began loudly protesting his innocence, accusing Tang Chung of being at fault. He pointed out that she had urged her eldest daughter to marry this girl and wondered why they were now calling the police and accusing him of wrongdoing. The woman had indeed suggested that her daughter marry Gu Manchi Cho. Upon hearing this, Cho looked at her mother in shock and asked if she was really supposed to marry that unattractive uncle. She expressed her strong dislike for him, comparing him to a fat pig, and declared that she disliked such ignorant and overweight men, preferring normal people instead. At the same moment, Mr. Li, overhearing part of the conversation, angrily accuses someone of calling him pork fat. The tension escalates, but Gu Manchi quickly steps in, assuring her daughter that she isn't going to find a new father. She instructs Gu to go home and wait, telling her brother to take the child away because the situation is too inappropriate for someone so young to witness. Her brother promises to return soon after handling the situation. Meanwhile, Tang Chungu, Gu's grandmother, suggests that they leave now that they've found Gu Manchi, and another man agrees with her. Chen Kuei, however, interrupts them, questioning why they're leaving without addressing the issues at hand. He warns them about misbehaving in a hotel owned by the Han family, implying that their actions could have consequences. Chen Kuei describes how he was inspecting the property when he heard cries for help coming from a room. Upon entering, he discovered a disturbing scene and immediately informed Mr. Li, insists on staying put to explain everything to the police. Chen Kuei suggests that Gu Manchi undergo a blood test, concerned she might have ingested something harmful, to which she agrees. Meanwhile, Tang Chungu accuses Gu Manchi of coming to the hotel willingly, reminding her that she had previously expressed a desire to marry a rich man. This woman pleads for the police not to be involved, arguing that this is a family matter and worrying about the reputation of both the Zhao and Li families. As events unfold, Gu Manchi becomes increasingly suspicious. She questions her mother about the safety of the water she drank in the car, noting how it had made her dizzy and weak. Gu Manchi accuses their mother of deception, leading her to a stranger's bed instead of a meeting with relatives as promised. Gu Manchi confronts her mother, asking whether she was brought back just to be used in some scheme. In a desperate attempt to explain, a man claims he was deceived, stating that Manchi's eldest daughter liked men like him and that she was already lying on the bed when he arrived. An older man advises the young master, Chang, not to rush to call the police, explaining that this entire ordeal is a misunderstanding. He argues that exposing the incident to the public would damage both families and begs for leniency and understanding. However, the older man firmly refuses the idea of marrying his granddaughter to Mr. Li, but for Gu Manchi, he's citing her lesser value in their eyes because she already has a child. Meanwhile, the young master, Chang, questions whether someone in the family played their part too well or if they had found the wrong person entirely. Word reaches him that Gu Manchi has gone to a hospital, raising concerns that Gu Manchi might have been harmed during all this. The young master grows increasingly frustrated with how the situation has spiraled out of control and the failure of someone, likely Tang Chungu, to protect Gu Manchi and her child from this plot. In another location, a figure wearing headphones sits at a laptop, working in the background. A voiceover reveals that an IP address traced back to Gu Manchi's house indicates advanced hacking activity. Someone expresses doubt that Gu Manchi could be involved, describing her as weak and lacking cunning, suggesting that someone else might be orchestrating these schemes behind the scenes. As tensions rise, an urgent conversation unfolds in which Chang is instructed to call the police. Tang Chungu's addressing Gu Manchi, pleads for leniency, reminding him of her ties to both the Zhao and Li families. Internally, Gu Manchi reflects on Tang Chungu's obsession with profit and vanity, criticizing her for putting family honor over her daughter's safety and well-being. Feeling guilt over the manipulation and deception, Chang finally insists on calling the police, cutting off Tang Chungu, who reacts with surprise. The narration reveals a deeper plot. The Zhao family has been collaborating with the Li family in secret, employing underhanded tactics to achieve their goals. Xia Yan discusses the consequences of an attempted crime, speculating that Mr. Li may face a short jail sentence. Xia reflects on his lack of power to resist while contemplating the true nature of the Zhao family. Information surfaces that the Zhao family has taken over Gu Manchi's house in town, leaving Gu Manchi shocked and questioning their aggressive behavior. An offer is made for Gu Manqi and Gu to stay under protection until a solution is found. The strained relationships come under scrutiny as Gu Manqi notes Zhao's support despite family connections. A coffee cup is set on the table as Chia Yen speaks critically of the Theo family, calling out issues with manipulative parents and a scheming sister. Gu vows to counter the Zhao family's actions in Mr. Li's light sentence. An argument ensues between two individuals over a failed plan involving Gu Manqi, with one expressing resentment over past decisions. Tang Chungo suggests to consider an alliance with Song Chen family due to Gu Manqi's sister interest in a potential partner. An employee interrupts with scandalous news concerning the Li Group, which threatens the standing of everyone involved. There's shock at the possible impact on the other family's business ties with the Li family. The conversation shifts to deleting online negative news, but concerns rise about the sheer volume of information. Two people discuss identifying the source of the leak, suspecting powerful forces at play due to the widespread broadcast. Urgent instructions are issued to sever ties with the Li family by arranging a shareholders' meeting. Tang Chungo finds it odd that the scandals involving the Li family align with Gu Manqi's troubles, speculating about potential enemies. Someone mentions the reappearance of a particular information source responsible for spreading rumors about the Li family. A map reveals the IP location traced to the western district of capital, leading to speculation about Gu Manqi's possible involvement. However, doubts remain about her hacking skills, though the hacker's expertise continues to intrigue Chen Kuei. Recollections are shared about tracking a woman for years, culminating in a realization. Following an unexpected encounter, Chen Kuei reflects on discovering a woman's cross-dressing. After the encounter, Chen Kuei expresses frustration and curiosity about someone's whereabouts. A warning is issued to Chen Kuei's potential actions. Chen Kuei responds by ordering someone to be beaten, with hospitalization as the intended outcome, a command acknowledged by his subordinate. Characters reflect on the young master's transformation after a kidnapping incident, noting how he has become ruthless in dealing with unruly members of the Klalan group. Meanwhile, a hacker is surprised to encounter a strong firewall while working on a laptop, realizing their task won't be as easy as anticipated. As the Li family faces downfall and the Zhao family retreats, one character feels a sense of relief and is ready to relax. However, a few days later, unease sets in as they realize the situation is far from resolved. On a lighter note, the scene shifts to a classroom, where a teacher is encouraging students to answer a math question. The teacher hints at choosing the cutest kid in class, offering a reward for the correct answer. A character narrates a situation involving Zhe Yan's arrangements, and excitement builds over the chance to earn a little red flower reward. Shu Shu struggles with the math question, feeling stressed, while the teacher turns to her and asks her to solve it. Confidently, Gu answers that 3 + 2 = 5, earning applause from her classmates and the coveted little red flower reward. She is praised for being amazing, but internally, Gu wonders when she can grow up and leave kindergarten behind. The noisy classroom environment begins to irritate her, making her long for the future. On the weekend, Gu reads a note about her mother's company event and grumbles about the chaotic schedule. While exploring, she finds an interesting room and wonders if her auntie is inside. In a different scene, Lin Xiaozhou, a quirky gang member, is eating noodles when Gu enters. Lin Xiaozhou, impressed by her cuteness, greets her warmly and regrets not meeting her sooner due to his attendance at an event. Lin Xiaozhou introduces himself and offers to teach Gu how to play games, even asking what she had for breakfast. However, Gu finds him too noisy and overwhelming, mentally comparing him to the chaotic environment she already finds irritating at kindergarten. A young child with pink hair expresses her hunger to an adult who finds her chubby face adorable. The adult, amused by her cuteness, offers her a piece of bread and clarifies that he's not her aunt. Instead, he introduces himself and suggests she call him Brother Xiaozhu. While eating, the child, Gu, innocently asks if Brother Xiaozhu likes her uncle, which he confirms. Gu, curious, wonders why Xiaozhu can't be her aunt if he likes her uncle. She references something she learned in kindergarten: when two people like each other, they can get married. This statement surprises Xiaozhu, leaving him momentarily flustered. He tries to explain that his relationship with her uncle is one of brotherly love, not the kind that leads to marriage. Amused but confused by the child's understanding, Xiaozhu gently educates Gu about the different kinds of love and pleads with her not to tell her uncle about the misunderstanding, fearing it might create awkwardness. Reflecting on the original novel's events, Gu recalls that her uncle's unexpressed feelings were never openly addressed. Xiao Zhu, trying to distract Gu from further questions, offers to play a game with her, lifting her joyfully onto his shoulders. The two bond as Xiao Zhu teaches her about different elements of the game, explaining the game's reputation and development. He sets up a match with a bot, explaining they should play in secret and cautioning Gu not to let her uncle know. However, just as they're about to begin, Gu's uncle, Zioyan, enters the room, catching them by surprise. Xiao Zhu, feeling nervous, awkwardly responds to Zioyan's casual question about what they were doing. Zioyan, unfazed, invites Xiao Zhu on a shopping trip. Zioyan also extends the invitation to Gu, but she declines, mentioning that her nanny is expected to arrive soon. The uncle advises Gu to behave and listen to the nanny before they both say their goodbyes. As Zioyan and Xiao Zhu leave, Gu notices someone secretly taking photos of them from a distance. She feels concerned and wonders why someone would be spying on her uncle and Xiao Zhu. The scene hints at deeper, hidden family dynamics, and Gu reflects on how the discovery of her uncle's feelings might affect the narrative of the original novel. Later, a confrontation erupts at a public event, where a group of protesters accuses a character of misconduct. In the aftermath, a company sends a termination notice, causing significant distress for the individual involved. Just when it seems things couldn't get worse, Lin Xiaozhou, a prominent streamer, is attacked by a deranged fan, resulting in a broken arm and the devastating loss of his passion for gaming. Zhu Yan, currently abroad, is unable to provide any immediate help. Lin Xiaozhou, who had been full of enthusiasm and energy, now finds himself confined to a hospital bed, facing a dark and uncertain future. In despair, Lin Xiaozhou contemplates his situation and ultimately decides to end his life, unable to cope with the overwhelming pressure. Gu, the pink-haired character, is determined to help Lin Xiaozhou and protect his inheritance, realizing the critical role she must play. Meanwhile, a family member places the blame for Lin Xiaozhou's tragedy on Xiaoyan's absence, stirring anger and resentment among the adults. Two adults discuss the situation, accusing a malevolent figure of casting an enchantment. They express urgency in their discussions, worrying about the lack of proper guidance and authority in managing the unfolding chaos. Soon after, the scene shifts to an airport, where Gu is informed that her family members are leaving on a business trip. Gu is instructed to listen to Xiaozhou and not wander around. Despite concerns from Xiaoyan about leaving his niece behind, Gu promises to behave, and Xiaozhou confidently assures everyone that she will take good care of Gu during their absence. With reassurances exchanged, the adults wave goodbye and board their flight. Meanwhile, Gu walks with Xiaozhou at night. He smiles at her and says, "Let's go home and eat." Gu, happy to spend time with Xiaozhou, smiles brightly and agrees. As they continue walking, Xiaozhou mentions his plans to attend the streamer's annual conference the following day. He invites Gu along, and she enthusiastically agrees, saying, "Not only will I go, but I've also prepared a big drama for the event." The scene shifts to the night of the conference. At the streamer's annual conference, excitement buzzes in the air. A large crowd gathers, waiting for their favorite personalities to appear. Among them, someone murmurs, "I wonder if I'll see Juho tonight." Another person chimes in, "I hope to see old Deo. He sometimes plays games with Juju. It's so cute." The camera zooms in on a girl with striking pink hair and blue eyes, Gu, sitting quietly amidst the crowd, deep in thought. Kid is really popular, she thinks, watching the fans cheer eagerly. But then her expression turns serious as her eyes shift downward, focusing on someone's feet passing by. But how long can a fan's love last? Her thoughts become darker. Once a shocking scandal breaks, these fans will all turn against him. They'll be the straw that breaks him. The cheers grow louder as Johorzo, a famous streamer, takes the stage. In the midst of the excitement, Xiaozhou seated next to Gu leans down to speak to her. "Gu, I'm going for an interview soon. Stay seated and behave, okay?" Gu nods, replying, "Okay." The man smiles and stands to leave, but before he can go, a girl approaches them with a radiant smile. "Kid, long time no see. And you brought a cute little child," the woman says, her eyes briefly locking on Gu. Gu's eyes sharpen, her inner thoughts racing. The target I've been waiting for is finally here. The camera zooms in on the woman. A caption appears, identifying her as Ba-yi, a popular female streamer from the novel. In the story, Ba-yi had falsely accused Lin Xiaozhou of sexual harassment, using the scandal to propel herself into stardom. Eventually, she married into a wealthy family by connecting with a second-generation rich man. The man laughs, introducing Gu. "This is my buddy's niece, Shou. He asked me to take care of her for a while." Cute, right? Ba-yi crouches down to Gu's level, her voice sickly sweet. "Such a cute little girl." "Are you in kindergarten?" Gu, maintaining a neutral expression, responds flatly. "Gu goes to kindergarten." Ba-yi chuckles and adds, "That's amazing, Gu. Kindergarten is such an important time." Gu narrows her eyes and replies sarcastically, "What's so amazing about going to kindergarten?" She wonders if Ba-yi is really that superficial. The man laughs nervously, covering Gu's mouth playfully. "Haha, don't take a child's words to heart." Suddenly, Xiaofang approaches and interrupts, calling out, "Xiaozhou, the interview is about to start. Come over quickly. After that, you'll need to meet with young Master Chang. This year's conference is hosted by the Cheng family of the capital." "Right," the man, Lin Xiaozhou, responds. Xiaofang then reaches out, asking for his phone. "Give me your phone. I'll keep it safe for you," she says. Xiaozhou hands over his phone, but Gu, with sharp eyes, suddenly speaks up. "Brother Xiaozhou, I want to play League of Glory. Can I keep your phone, please?" Xiaozhou grins and, without thinking, hands the phone to Gu. "Sure, here you go, Shou. Just make sure to behave and wait here for me." Xiaofang looks concerned, trying to hide her anxiety. "This kid. They tend to lose things," she mutters under her breath. Xiaozhou, however, reassures her with a smile. "It's fine, let her play. She'll be careful." He pats Gu's head and walks off, leaving her holding the phone. As they leave, Ba-yi turns to Xiaofang and whispers, "What now?" Xiaofang glances at Ba-yi and replies quietly, "I'll follow Xiaozhou. You handle things here." Ba-yi nods, understood. Gu, watching the two adults exchange conspiratorial glances, thinks to herself, "You two keep giving each other those looks? Do you think I'm blind?" She knows that Lin Xiaozhou's assistant had already been bribed by the Zhao family to steal his phone and send harassing texts. But Gu isn't about to let that happen. Ba-yi, attempting to be friendly, reaches out, "Gu, let me take care of the phone for you." Just then, Gu's sharp ears catch a familiar voice. She looks up, her intense expression softening into a bright smile. "Long-legged uncle," she shouts, sprinting towards a tall figure in the crowd. Ba-yi watches in confusion as Gu runs to the man, hugging him tightly. "Long-legged uncle. Gu sees you again." Gu beams up at him. "Gu found Mama last time. Mama was bullied by bad guys, but the bad guys went to jail." The tall man, Song Chen, looks down at the child with a mix of surprise and amusement. His thoughts race, "It's this child again." A man nearby rushes over, apologizing profusely, "Sorry, President Song. This is the child that streamer Lin brought. I'll take her away right now." Song Chen shakes his head slightly. "It's crowded here. Kids tend to run around. Just be more careful." Ba-yi watches Gu, thinking to herself, "Kids are really troublesome. I need to quickly get the phone from her." Unexpectedly, Gu holds up Lin Xiaozhou's phone, her eyes wide and innocent, and asks, "Sister, can you help Gu hold the phone?" Ba-yi's eyes light up with excitement. She's actually offering it willingly, she thinks. Sure, Ba-yi responds, barely concealing her eagerness. "Shou wants to go to the bathroom," Gu adds sweetly. Ba-yi, thrilled with how easy this is going, says, "Go ahead. I'll wait for you right here." "Thank you, sister," Gu replies, with a little nod, before scampering off. But her thoughts are racing. By now, Lin Xiaozhou should have finished his interview and is probably resting in the lounge. In the novel, his stomach illness acts up, and he faints from the pain, spending the entire night unnoticed. A brief flashback scene shows Lin Xiaozhou collapsed on the floor of the lounge, clutching his stomach in agony. By dawn, Ba-yi has already exposed the so-called harassment on Weibo. As Gu runs through the crowd, someone nearby notices her and calls out, "Oh dear, whose child is that?" Slow down. But Gu's focus is sharp. Brother Xiaozhou, don't worry. I'll find someone to save you.